Hey everyone, how's it going Facebook? I'm a little bit early on Friday. It's almost 1 p.m. and time for our Exploring a Coastal Wetland live stream. My name is Carly. Thanks if you're already tuning in. You're just a couple minutes early. Just making sure that everything is set up the right orientation and I'm not sideways. So I'll get started here in just a moment. But go ahead if you are listening in, if you're tuning in already, let me know if everything looks good, if you can hear my voice, if I'm not turned sideways, and I'm excited to get started and explore this beautiful wetland on this wonderful, partially sunny day in Humboldt County. Awesome. So like I mentioned, I'm out here at Wood Creek, a Freshwater Farms Reserve and North Coast Regional Land Trust property. We're waiting till just about 1 p.m. to get started. We're almost there. Just took a peek at my watch. Just give you guys a little pan of what I'm looking at out here. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's great to have you all here on the live stream. I've really been enjoying these live stream events and getting to check in with folks, even though it's virtual during shelter in place. So I appreciate you being here. And I think we're at 1 p.m., so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm really excited. Like I said, today we are going to be exploring this coastal wetland, this beautiful coastal wetland. We're going to be talking a little bit about what are wetlands? Why are they important? Why should we care about wetlands? Who lives here? Who uses this space? And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the restoration work that's been done out here at Wood Creek and Freshwater Farms Reserve. And before we get into that, my name is Carly. I work with the North Coast Regional Land Trust, and it's so great to see you on here. For the entire month of April, the North Coast Regional Land Trust is bringing you some live stream series, and that's usually Tuesdays at 1 p.m. And so this past Tuesday, I tried to do the Exploring a Coastal Wetland series. I had some technical difficulties, not sure what's going on there, but we're bringing you the originally broadcasted live stream now. So thank you for tuning in. And let's jump in. So I wanted to first talk about, well, what is a wetland? What is a wetland? A wetland is any area of land that is typically covered with some shallow water, or maybe the soil is somewhat saturated. And then let me just pan you to where we're at now. This is a wetland. I'm out here today at Freshwater Farms Reserve. We are looking at Wood Creek, which feeds into Freshwater Slough and drains into, it's part of the Freshwater Creek watershed, and it drains into the greater Humboldt Bay here in Northern California. And it's a beautiful sunny day out here today. So why are wetlands important? They're important for many, many reasons. One of them is that these wetlands really act like sponges. They absorb a lot of excess water during big storm events, and they provide a great holding place for all of that excess water that we see that would otherwise maybe contribute to flooding in areas where we would hope that flooding didn't occur. So why else are they so awesome? They are so awesome because they act like nature's strainer. You might see a strainer in your living room, or in your living room. I hope you don't see a strainer in your living room, but maybe you do. You might actually find that in your kitchen. You use that to maybe sift some flour, strain some pasta, and a wetland is like a strainer for nature, and it is straining out debris, it is straining out silt, it's straining out other pollutants, and it's helping keep the environment clean. So wetlands are strainers, they're sponges, and they're also pit stops, right? So I like to think about wetlands as a pit stop for migratory animals, in particular birds. shorebirds, geese, ducks, waterfowl. Many migratory species utilize wetland habitats like this because they provide good habitat for them. If you can imagine being a migratory bird and you're making hundreds and hundreds of mile journey, maybe even thousands of miles, if you are flying high up in the sky and you happen to see a wetland habitat like this, you are going to know, hey Tracy, how's it going? You are going to be really happy because you know that this habitat has all of the requirements that you need to get fed, to find water, and to take a nice rest in between your long migratory route. And so those are a few reasons why I think wetlands are amazing and important. They support a large variety of biodiversity. So biodiversity are the various living things and interactions happening in a place, and wetlands support a large variety of biodiversity. But I would love to hear from you. If you have any really interesting, cool facts about wetlands that you would love to share, I would really love to hear that. And so we've talked a little bit about why they're important, and I want to focus on, well, who lives here? Who lives in a wetland habitat like this? And the question is, who doesn't, right? There are, yay, great immigration stopover, says John Griffith. That is for sure. They're like a cozy little pillow for the bird to come lay its head on. But, so who lives here? You will see deer here. You will see, you'll see fish. You'll see foxes. You will see barn owls. You can see a great egret, mallards. I just saw some mallards actually when I walked out here. American robins. The list goes on and on. Pacific tree frogs. And in this location at Freshwater Farms Reserve, remember that word farm, you will also see cows. You'll see chickens. You even see some really friendly goats, because this reserve, Freshwater Farms Reserve, and this wetland is a wild and working landscape. And what is a wild and working landscape? A wild and working landscape is a landscape that implements multiple use land management strategies and practices. And here in particular, we are implementing multiple land use management strategies to promote habitat that supports wildlife, and also maintain sustainable agricultural practices so that this can continue to be a productive working land well into the future and support our local economies and community. Oh, look at that. I don't know if you guys can see, but a mallard just flew by. Amazing. And so we think that these landscapes that can promote multiple use land management practices are so important. And one of the things I want to talk to you about is, while this landscape supports cattle, actually I'll pan you over. So right over there, you guys are seeing those power lines. Those power lines are part of our pasture, and they make up the pasture there, which is where we have seasonal cattle grazing on the property. We have about 17 acres of cattle grazing pasture there. And while this property supports cattle and it supports goats and chickens, it also is vital habitat, so very important habitat for some threatened and endangered fish species. That is, fish species whose population numbers are very low. At times they can get so low to the point of extinction. And you know, I could do a whole live stream on the many threats that endangered and threatened fish species face, but I'm not going to do that. I will say one of the major threats is that they've lost a lot of their habitat. And maybe you're saying, what are you talking about, Carly? Coho salmon and steelhead live in the ocean. We all know that. And you are right, partially. Coho salmon and steelhead are what we call anadromous fish, meaning that they are born in freshwater. They will migrate out to spend their adult life in saltwater, and then they will actually come back to the freshwater in order to lay their eggs, reproduce, and ultimately die as part of their natural life history. But what has happened is significant amounts of wetland habitat, which is essential for a young fish to grow big and strong, have been lost for many reasons. But these habitats for these fish, I'm going to pan it and we're going to walk through. And so, you know, there could be some coho salmon in here right now. In fact, I bet you there is. We just can't see them because we're talking about fish that are, see, they're pretty small. They're like this. We're talking about baby coho salmon and steelhead. And this habitat, wetlands like this, provide a place for a small fish to rest, to hide. See, these features like this are, let me see, right there. These are amazing areas for a coho salmon to go and hide from predators, because let me tell you, when you're a small little fish like that, there are so many things that want to eat you, okay? And so these salmon will hide under here. They'll get a bunch of food because there's plenty of yummy benthic macroinvertebrates, or what we call bugs, living in this waterway. And they start growing big and strong. And ultimately, the bigger and stronger they can be as young juvenile fish before they head out to the ocean, the better chance they will have at surviving and making it into adulthood, ultimately coming back and reproducing. And so Tracy says, so elder salmon lay the eggs. Coho salmon, when they have reached what we call the life cycle stage of a spawner, have made their way back from the ocean, and they will start migrating up some of the streams. And we call this, sometimes they're trying to find their natal stream, so the stream in which, or the watershed in which they were born. And they swim upstream. The female salmon are building a nest. They're building a redd using their big caudal fin, their strong caudal fin. They're digging that nest. I'm going like this because I'm acting like I'm using my caudal fin to dig a nest out of rocks, because their nests are made out of rocks. And the male salmon are they've developed these big kypes, and they're jarring with each other, and they are trying to lay their milt and fertilize the eggs that a female salmon has laid in order to give rise to the next generation of salmon. And salmon are a remarkable species, right? They say it takes a salmon to grow a salmon, and part of their life history, like I mentioned, is they die fairly close to where they laid their eggs, where they reproduced. And there is purpose behind that. There is a huge purpose behind that, and that is their decomposing body, their adult body, will give rise to the next generation of salmon or steelhead, depending on the fish you're talking about. And so I hope that answers your question, Tracy. Yes, they do lay eggs. They lay thousands of eggs in one batch. And so we've talked a little bit about what a wetland is, why it's important, who you'll find living here, and especially here at Freshwater Farms, you won't just find wildlife, you'll also find cows and chickens and goats. And I want to talk a little bit about the restoration work here that's been done. And so I'm actually walking along the restored channel of Wood Creek, and this property, for some context, in the early 1900s, this property was diked and levied in order to convert it into drier land for agricultural use. So what does it mean to dike and levee something? When you dike and levee something, you put up a physical barrier. Usually we call it an embankment along the waterway to actually prevent water from entering into the property, which is really great if you are trying to graze all year long. Keeps the property nice and dry. It's not so great if you are a young fish trying to find some of this slow moving habitat in order to grow big and strong. And so in the early 2000s, restoration work was, or excuse me, not yet. In the early 2000s, some studies were done out here at the tide gate, so at where the embankment was, and what they found, it was California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and what they found was that, in fact, in the tide gate, there were some leaks, and that young fish were finding their way, craftily finding their way through the tide gate, and they were coming in and using some of these old channels and really making use of that off-channel habitat. And it didn't look like this. It looked a lot different. But needless to say, the fish were here and they were using that habitat. And the North Coast Regional Land Trust, along with some of our amazing partners, set out to restore this landscape. And the goal of the restoration was to increase off-channel habitat, increase wetland habitat like this, to provide these estuarine habitats, what we call, for threatened and endangered fish species and other wildlife, and also maintain agricultural productivity on this productive landscape. And so, and maybe I should step back a moment. Restoration, we've heard this word. Restoration is the act of returning something to its former condition to some extent. And habitat restoration is very similar. It is the act of returning a habitat to its former condition. And so in 2010, the first phase of restoration took place, and it was the creation of 35 acres of salt marsh habitat and 4 slough networks, kind of like this, not in this area, but over out yonder. I can't quite point. There we go. Over that way on the property. And we also removed the tide gate that was blocking the water from entering the property. And the hope there was that we would increase the amount of tidal influence, so the amount of freshwater and saltwater exchange happening on a daily basis. Because believe it or not, we are a tidally influenced property, which means the daily tides influence how much water we see in these channels right behind me. And what we found with this restoration work, and what I didn't mention, is we also created some off-channel ponds, okay? And these off-channel ponds and all of the other restoration work, monitoring of it, showed us that in fact the fish we were hoping to see come back here they were using the property, they were using these channels, and they were benefiting from the off-channel habitat that we have here at Freshwater Farms Reserve. And another cool thing, another fish that we found using the property, and remember, we're talking about young baby fish, little baby fish, right? They, not only were we seeing the endangered coho salmon here, but we were also seeing the elusive tidewater goby. And the tidewater goby is a sweet little burrowing fish, and we were also very excited to see it here. And with this knowledge, with this monitoring and these positive results, we decided that we would do a second phase of restoration. And the second phase of restoration created an additional 15 acres of more freshwater dominant slough channels. It also alleviated some flooding that was happening on the property in our pasture, because we wanted to be able to get cows on there and ensure that they would have plenty of ample grass and location. Oop, I got some ducks flying away that were in the off-channel pond. Look at that, wetlands providing habitats for ducks. And what you guys can't see, and I wish I could take you over there, is I'm looking over in our pasture right now, and there are some Canada geese, not Canadian geese, and they're just having a great time over there. They look really peaceful. Anyways, so getting back to the restoration, I get so distracted seeing all the wildlife out here in this wetland. What we see now is this really complex wetland habitat with shallow wetlands, off-channel ponds, salt marsh and freshwater habitats, and we also see a pasture. And in 2019, monitoring showed approximately 900 coho salmon used the property in 2019, and they grew and coexisted alongside a herd of about 20 cattle that were in the pasture this summer. And so I just really hope that that drives home the message that we can have these landscapes that are multiple use land management, that have multiple use land management practices going on, right? Agricultural production, wetland habitat, and these animals can coexist alongside each other. These habitats can coexist alongside each other and can be complementary to each other. And so I only named a couple anadromous fish. If you're listening, I would love for you to comment and tell me an anadromous fish that you see living near you. If you have anadromous fish living in the waterways alongside you, let me know what they are. I would love to hear about anadromous fish that are close to you. They are near and dear to my heart. Howdy, Linda. How's it going? And also, wherever you are, if you have some restoration work, maybe you see it when you are driving from point A to B, or when you're walking around in your neighborhood or at your favorite community outdoor space. Maybe you've seen signs of restoration or some work that's being done there. Definitely comment and let me know where that is. I love to hear about different restoration work taking place around our communities, and I'd love to hear that from you. And so this is our tour of a coastal wetland. You guys are getting a sneak peek preview into an area of Freshwater Farms Reserve that's not open to the public, because we want it to maintain its capacity to be a wetland habitat for wildlife. And if you guys have any questions, we covered a lot today. We talked about wetlands, we talked about why they're important, who lives in them, who benefits from wetlands, and some of the restoration work that's happened out on this property. But if you have any questions about any of that, please leave me a comment in the comment box. I would love to answer those questions and connect with you more. This place is so near and dear to my heart, so I'm so happy that I can share it with you, and we can walk out here together. And if you want to know more about the Connect to the Outdoors series, if you want to join in next week, I hope you check us out on Instagram or Facebook. We have directions on how to join, how to check these events out. Our next event is scheduled for this upcoming Tuesday. I believe that's April 28th, and that's going to be poetry reading with NRLT's intern, Skylar. She's going to be back out here at Freshwater Farms Reserve reading some poetry for you all. And until then, be safe, be well, and thank you for joining in.